coming in. Okay, so thanks everybody for joining. This is our first Journal Club series of the rebooted series. And we're expecting to have some more Journal Club presentations. Just as a little bit of a point on what this is about, we previously had Journal Clubs through medRxiv, and we found that sometimes it's nice to just try to invite the authors themselves to present their work rather than try to recapitulate it, have someone recapitulate it. So whenever possible, we like to try to do that. So we were lucky this time to be able to get Victoria to present her work on CorText, which I think is like the first model I've seen to try to integrate functional brain data into LLMs. So I think it's really sort of timely and interesting work that I'm excited to hear about. Got a little bit of formal-ish background intro on Victoria. So Victoria is currently a PhD student at University of Osnabrück, working with Tim Kietzman. So I first learned about Victoria's work a few years ago from a paper she co-led on topographic neural networks. And then a few months ago, I saw she had this new paper on CorText. And then most recently, I think maybe a month ago, I saw she has a new paper on the Umwelt representation hypothesis, which looks, I haven't read it, but it looks like a kind of refinement on the well-known Platonic representation hypothesis, which was from MIT Philip Asola, like maybe 2 years ago. So overall, Victoria seems to be having a super productive PhD, going after some of the big questions in neuro AI, and I think we're super lucky to get to have her as our first presenter.
Thanks, Connor. It's a lovely introduction. So cool that you found my found the recent paper on universality.
Yeah, it looks good. Sorry, I haven't read it yet, but it looks good. And then a note on the format. So the goal is for this to be sort of a more casual journal club-like discussion of a paper. So if you have clarification questions during the slides, please interrupt or raise your hand or make a comment in the chat. I'll interrupt Victoria to get these clarification questions answered. But if you have longer discussion questions, we should save these for the end to not try to break the flow too much. So we'll do a longer discussion at the end. I think that's pretty much it. And I think most of the people have joined. So I'll send it over to you, Victoria.
Perfect. Can I just ask, we will have some time for discussion until 5:15 or something? Okay, perfect.
Yeah, that should be good.
Yeah, and please, everyone, just ask away, interrupt me. We'd like to have everyone on board, with the story. So just let me know if there's something that's unclear or you have a comment.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, so yeah, as Connor already said, I'm going to present my work on CorText, brain-language fusion. Today, we brought out our preprints last year, and since then been refining it. So I'm very happy to present it today to you, and also get some feedback and ideas from the community. So thank you again for inviting me to do this. So I'm going to start with the thing that everyone already knows, which is that generative language models are really changing the way we interface with data, both in personal life and in research, of course. And there's something interesting about that. So systems that use natural language, they're transforming the way that we interact with this data and with our compute, basically. They can do reasoning, integrate complex knowledge systems. And then the interesting thing is that they seem to offer this great scaffold for interfacing with data of other modalities, such as image or video or audio. And we are seeing this shift to foundation models. So it's incredibly useful. Natural language is useful. And we're asking ourselves whether decoding of mental states could be the next frontier for this approach. So we would like to discover the information that's present in high-dimensional neural activity. For example, to better understand functional topography, there might be some downstream clinical applications, etc. So the particular use case today is fMRI recordings of people viewing images, which I think a lot of work has been done on the last few years or perhaps this decade. So usually there's people watching scenes or videos, and classically neural decoding has been trying to find some mapping from this neural data to some kind of feature space, usually category or variable based, in order to do some kind of classification or identification of neural contents. But now recently, with the advance of machine learning, we're getting much richer continuous feature spaces that are not just handcrafted, but learned. So in particular, these language embeddings, for example, are offering these kind of continuous feature spaces, and this has been working really well. So it's indicating that we can indeed also apply cross-modal transfer, like I mentioned before, with LLMs, to brain data. So learning a mapping between, for example, language descriptions of scene images, mapping from brain data into these language embeddings or image embeddings, and then sometimes some kind of generator on top, be it into language or some diffusion for image reconstruction. And then notably also from the MedArc team, the MindEye paper, for example. So yeah, this is super cool, and there's insane advances, I think, in the field in terms of understanding what and where information is present in neural responses, and showing that we can do this richer decoding. But yeah, so here today, focusing on decoding of visual neural content with natural language as output formats, most current methods are still decoding into static embedding vectors, which have their limitations because they might not fully capture the complex spatial and semantic interactions in natural scenes, move beyond these predefined categories or the rigid syntax of image captions, and don't really offer this flexible decoding that might generalize, because different questions about neural content need different decoders. So we'd like to see how we can bring the field of neural decoding to integrate with these recent developments in large language models and multimodal models. And as natural language offers this really nice compositional code, we can ask if we can leverage generative natural language models for neuroscience for open-ended neural decoding. And so yeah, the work I present to you today will suggest we can do this, and we will do so using brain language fusion, extending large language models, to do context-sensitive language generation conditioned on the brain activity. So importantly, instead of just brain translation, as with literal text decoding or image decoding, we're creating an interactive readout, where one of its strengths is flexible decoding also in different formats. Yeah, okay, so how to build a brain language model. I'll start here with a sort of intuitive schematic sort of overview of the approach, and then go into the details of how we actually did this. So assume we have some data set of neural recordings from people watching scenes. Usually this is the natural scenes data set, and that's also what I'm going to be using today. And we want to decode the visual content using some kind of pre-trained language model. So first of all, we have to find a way to combine the brain and language embeddings. So we have to be able to get brain embeddings that we can use as a context for the language prompt, right? And so the first step here, assuming that the brain is some kind of nonlinear, strange image encoder. So we already have our image embedding, basically, by having this functional brain data. Our first step here is to parselate the brain activity in response to these scenes with some kind of informed functional parcellation. And it would be nice to get some kind of tokens, because then we can get the full functionality of transformer attention to do its thing, and it allows for isolation of components for interpretability and contextualization. Okay, so now we need to bring them to the same dimensionality of these language embeddings some way. So we need some kind of parcel-wise tokenizers and map them into the space that's operable for the language decoder that we have. So in principle, that is the only mapping that has to be learned. And you may recognize this from vision language models, for example, like Lava, that also do something like this. They have image embeddings, maybe clip embeddings, or some other kind of image model, and you just need to learn some kind of linear map or nonlinear map into a word embedding space to get a vision language model. So basically, we're doing the same thing, but just with brain data. So yeah, then you just concatenate the brain tokens with the prompt tokens, and then get the decoder to continue it and answer this multimodal brain language prompt. Okay, so far so good? Okay, so to be more precise, then the ingredients that we are using in our work and what we're presenting today is the natural scenes data set, as I already mentioned. So it's a 7 Tesla fMRI. I think it's one of the best fMRI data sets we have currently in the field, of 8 subjects that are viewing MS-CoCo images, each about 9,000 training trials, unique images, and then some holdout test sets, which is shared between the participants. Let's see. Then we have our parcellation. We are using the Schaefer Atlas here. You can also use the Glasser Atlas. There's many different kinds which have different assumptions and different benefits. We're using the Schaefer 100, so that means that we will get 100 parcels of the full cortex. Then we have an instruction data set. So the nice thing about NSD is that it's defined over CoCo. So we already have human captions for CoCo, which we can combine with some general descriptive questions. So describe the scene, or please provide a caption for the scene, etc. And then we are also using the Elvis Instruct dataset, which has some more detailed question answering pairs for every image. So together, this forms our instruction dataset. And then lastly, of course, we need a language decoder, and we are using Llama 3.1, 8 billion. It's an instruction fine-tuned LLM with 8 billion parameters. And yeah, notably, all these ingredients are modular and interchangeable, I think, in the framework that we are presenting. So this is a proof of concept to show how the framework works and that it works. But you can, in principle, use other good data sets or other instructions if you have those annotations, or other language models. Okay, so we have all the ingredients, so we're ready to do the brain language fusion. Yeah, so we need to get the brain responses into this language compatible space. So for each parcel or ROI, we will have one unique tokenizer that will be learned end-to-end with the language decoder. Importantly, we don't average signal within parcels. We take everything that's in there. And we give each of these ROIs then an MLP, and we need to map into the same dimensionality basically as the language space. Now there's a problem, because this is really quite large, 4,096 dimensions of Llama, and we have 300,000 vertices on the brain side. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of trainable parameters. So we have one little hack to reduce the number of parameters, and that's that we learn the ROI embeddings into a lower dimensional space by taking all the human caption Llama embeddings of the training sets, do PCA on these, take 95 or 97% of explained variance, and then use the transpose of this as a frozen linear layer, such that it functions as a low rank projection. So now we only have to learn from the vertices into something like 1,000 dimensional space, and then we have this inverse space PCA as frozen layer. So it's a little bit hacky, but yeah, otherwise it's already millions of parameters to train. I guess in the LLM space, that's not so much, but for the number of data samples that we have, it is. Okay, so now we have this brain tokenizer, one for each ROI, and then we need to train them, of course. So we have 2 phases of training. We do it just with cross entropy with the questions and the answers, or brain question answer. In phase 1, we just train the brain tokenizers and layer norm optionally of Llama, and just freeze the rest of the decoder. And then in phase 2, it's just like 2 epochs or something, we use quantized LoRa, which is a parameter efficient fine-tuning method. And it's also nice because the language capacities of Llama are maintained this way, but you just get the language decoder kind of in the mood for the task. Okay, so now I've told you all the ingredients and the architecture and training. So let's look at a few results. Yeah, here I'll show you one trial of the test sets of a model trained on one participant, and we can chat with it. 2 things to keep in mind. CorText has never seen an image. The language model has never seen an image. No images involved in this whole pipeline. And it's trained only on single turn conversation, but we can actually have a multi-turn dialogue with it. So I can ask, what's in this image? And it will answer. The model provides an answer. So it's a plate with a sandwich, a cup of coffee, pretty good. Can ask it about the location of the sandwich on the plate. Makes sense. What is its location? Okay. And then we can also generalize to new output templates, for example, generating a numbered list of all the objects that are there. So this is definitely much richer also than what we've been training on, right? To do a multi-turn dialogue and different formats. And yeah, so I want to show you also some mistakes because, okay, cool results, but there's also interesting failure modes. And what's nice about the multi-turn dialogue is that you can follow up on perhaps why you got a certain output and if there's something more that the model might be seeing. So again, what's in the image? It's a group of people standing in the snow. Pretty bad, I guess. Look again. Well, actually, they're also holding umbrellas in the snow. And now you look at the image and you're like, yeah, well, actually, it's a lot of sort of white, beachy, maybe just didn't really get the details and it just latched onto a snow situation. Okay, what else is there? There's also trees in the background. And now looking at this conversation holistically, you're like, okay, well, actually, if we would have just looked at the caption, we would have said, yeah, it's just wrong. But clearly, there is some interesting information that it is able to decode. And then last example, it can also output structured outputs, which could be really useful for downstream research. For example, asking it to output a scene graph for the image. And again, we have not trained it on doing scene graphs or anything. So Llama has a lot of interesting capacities, I guess, that we can dash onto when we're doing this kind of fine-tuning on brain data. Okay, so how well does it actually do? Let's quantify it a little bit.
Can I ask a quick question? Sorry, I don't know if we should say this for later, but I think the example with the snow is very interesting. It strikes me sort of bizarre that the LM wouldn't know that umbrellas are never on snow. And if it appears like snow, but there are umbrellas, then it's probably a beach. Is this strange to you?
Yes and no. So it could be that if it's just not really confident about the beachiness of the scene, it latches onto something else, but giving it a bit more. If you're also thinking of, like, for example, this chain of thought type of reasoning, giving it a little bit more time, basically, to gather those details that it didn't mention before because it was uncertain, it's not completely counterintuitive to me. Yeah, it might be that it's just uncertain. There is evidence for the beachiness of this scene, but it just doesn't make it to the final answer at first.
Yeah, very interesting either way, though.
Thanks. Okay, so let's see. Quantification. So first of all, we're going to look at the general scene descriptions, which were based on the COCO human captions, right? During training. So these are really simple questions. What's in this picture? Describe it in detail, etc. And I'm going to show you here on the left the distribution of clip scores between the output caption and the ground truth caption for actually 5 different models. 4 models, each of them trained on the data of one subject. And then, of course, we have a control model where we are shuffling all the fMRI betas, basically. And this converges onto just one type of caption, which is, I think, a man in a suit in an office, which seems to be sort of like the average caption of the data set. I'm not sure. Yeah, and then the line on the right is the consistency between human captions. So this is sort of like our ceiling-ish in terms of performance, and we see that all models are kind of approaching this. And then on the right, I have a few examples of different percentiles of this distribution for subject 1. Again, here you see in the lower percentile that there's also a mistake, like it's a surfer, but it's saying it's a man skiing. And we see that when the model is making mistakes, they are still in highly similar semantic clusters. So there's like a lot of surfers, skateboarders, skiers in this data set, and these are often confused. So even the mistakes are semantically close in a way. Okay, let's see. Then we move on to fine-grained question answering, because of course we are moving beyond just image captioning with this model, and we can do these more detailed interactions. So here we're using Quen score because clip is not so sensitive to details when you're trying to get these scores. For example, there is a zebra or there's no zebra will give you a very high CLIP score. Well, actually, semantically, this is a huge difference. So we use Quinn because it seems to be a bit more sensitive to this. Yeah, and then here again, we see that all models are better than our control model. We don't really have a ceiling value for this. Yeah, well, we can see that it is doing quite well. So it can count how many giraffes are there in the image. It's just one. It's a posture. What are the main subjects doing in this image? Let's see. So yeah, it's quite challenging actually to evaluate question answering, especially with these kind of mixed instruction data sets, because there's so many different types of questions. And as I said, maybe one word change can completely change the meaning of a sentence, and not all metrics are sensitive to this. So that's also why we move on to doing a bit more fine-grained analyses, to show that the detailed question answering actually works. It's by extracting all numerosity questions from this detailed Q&A set and measure performance there. And it does quite well on that. So yeah, again, this example with one giraffe, or like how many zebras are there in this image, and it can really reliably say whether there is just one or multiple people, for example, or animals. And here I'm showing you the difference to the correct numerosity. So it has like a slight tilted bias, but overall it is very good and definitely better than the control model. Okay, so does this brain language mapping generalize? Is it smooth? We have to start stress testing the model a little, because we're interested in general aspects of neural representation beyond just the distribution of the training data, and we really have to ask this question whether we're overfitting on semantic clusters. So this recent paper last year by the Kamitani lab, where they rightfully point out that the train and test images of NST share a lot of semantic content, and there's just relatively few semantic clusters actually. Of course, the images the trials are unique between the train and test. But they're pointing that many CLIP feature translators are often used in neural image reconstruction are not so capable of generalizing to new semantic clusters. So we want to test and assess the degree to which CorText may also be overfitting on this, and whether it can meaningfully interpolate. And so to do so, we train 3 model instances of CorText, each with one held out stimulus class to test a zero-shot generalization. So we train one model, CorText, without all the zebra trials, one without all the surfers, and one without all the airplanes. So we have 3 models that we can compare to the original CorText, which has seen just the whole training data set. This is all for subject 1. So yes, it can meaningfully interpolate to semantic categories not seen during training. So what I'm showing here is a lot of dots. It's a UMAP of all the human training captions, and then colored by category, rough category, people, food, places, etc. And the predicted captions, which are marked by little symbols. So the black one is the original CorText, and the zero-shot are the white symbols. And so we already see that predicted captions land overall in the right category clusters. So let's check out a few examples. So the CorText without zebra predicts that this zebra is actually a horse with a field and trees in the background, or is a pair of brown and white sheep. So it's kind of struggling to say the exact word zebra. And we see this in the other models as well. It's a person riding a snowboard, or a person riding a horse on the beach. So it doesn't want to say it, but we clearly see that there's some meaningful decoding of the image's features beyond these exact words. And I think one striking example here for me is the generalization of the spatial composition to unseen images, for example, with the kites, with the airplanes. So a group of kites flying in the sky, I mean, if you've been trained to never say the word airplane, why would you all of a sudden say it? But it does meaningfully generalize the spatial composition. It sees it's multiple, they're flying in the sky, it matches. But we have to quantify this further. As CorText can generalize to novel types of language tasks that we haven't trained on, we move into a bit more explicit question setting, an alternative force choice setting, with this novel prompt, in which we ask the model to answer with just one category. So what's in this image? Answer with one noun chosen from zebra, airplane, and surfer. So CorText original, which has seen everything, for the trial category, always says the right thing. And the other models can do this as well. So despite never having seen these corresponding semantic categories, they are likely to choose a correct target category. Sometimes it might be not very compliant with the task. That's the NA thing where it says, well, I'm not really sure. But overall, we see very good performance in here. I have also one control where we hold out all of these 3 categories and train the model and then do the same thing, because you could, in principle, you could say, okay, maybe it's just choosing the category that it's most confident about, but with holding them all, it still works. Okay, so far so good in terms of time. Yeah, so the decoder could pick up signals anywhere. So we want to run some kind of counterfactual analysis to ask which brain regions contribute to inference and whether they are matching to what we know about the functional topography of the brain. And yeah, particularly we would like to see how this brain language mapping that we now know is also sort of continuous, how it behaves under targeted changes in the neural data. And to do that, we do an in-silico microstimulation experiment. So we take 20 test trials with people and 20 without. And we get the brain responses for these trials. Then we use some functional localizers, specifically face localizers from NSD, take those t-values of this localizer and multiply it by a certain simulation value, and then we add that to the original trial betas. So you can imagine that maybe if we're taking the face localizer, that we're amping up FFA. And then we ask a question, what's in this picture? And then we hope that with increasing simulation strength, the model will start outputting, seeing a person because we're amping it up. And that works. So let's do it for trials where no people are present. So with increasing simulation strength, the number of captions that mention people smoothly increases. So here on the left, we see a few examples. We start off with a bowl of green salad, and we end up with two men standing in a car, smiling, holding a camera. And the same thing we see here with the airplane trial, where after large simulation, we see also people standing on a boat. So here with increasing simulation strength, we see that the percentage of captions that are about people smoothly increases. And then to further quantify it, we can also calculate the change in evidence by extracting probabilities for some person-related tokens, like person, people, man, woman, etc. And then for each trial, sum the softmax probabilities of the tokens and compute the log probs. And then the shifts from baseline quantifies the effect of the perturbation. And we see this also smoothly increases with the simulation strength. And then, funnily enough, we can also do the reverse. So to me, this was quite surprising, actually. I wasn't sure if that was going to work. But yeah, to show that we have that there's a causal influence of the neural activity on the language outputs that is manipulable, we also can remove the person response. So we start off with a trial of someone watching a group of kids playing Frisbee, and we end up with a living room. Interestingly, removing this people response always converges to living rooms, which is interesting because there's no people present, but this is clearly a people space, right? Yeah, again, quantifying this, we see this is also a smooth decrease with stronger inhibition. Yeah, it's a bit harder to remove this people response because it's more distributed than just the top 1% of face selective voxels. Of course, there's also like regions like EBA where there's some remaining signal left. So we see that this is a little bit harder. Yeah, so both excitatory and inhibitory effects are scaling with the microstimulation strength. So we have some greater control over semantic content expressed in language. So that opens up a whole new way of performing counterfactual analyses with some, hypothesis-driven in-silico perturbation experiments without having to record new data. At least that's the dream. Yeah, so we would like to sort of try doing this in a loop where we can iterate over all the different vertices or clusters of them and see the effect it has on the captions. I think there's a question, right? Oh, I can see someone. You read it to me?
Yeah, so Rashab was asking, do you think it's surprising that it doesn't keep the other details of the image when removing people? a field, the grass, and the Frisbee example.
So that it's not keeping the
Yeah,
content?
like the Frisbee one, it doesn't just delete the people at beta -5 and just say like a field with trees.
So it sort of does. I am not showing you all examples here of the more intermediate strengths. Let me see. Might kind of go back on slides. So, for example, here you see with increasing or stimulating, it's food first, and then it's a person holding food. And then in the end, with 5, I mean, you kind of become, it's a weird brain signal that you have at that point. It becomes a bit OOD, right? So it's really just people. And I think the rest of the signal is completely drowned relative to the stimulation. So we do see that there is some kind of perhaps even compositional addition or also removal of this content. But yeah, I'm not showing you the intermediate steps right here. Also with the airplane, maybe it's because I've been working too much with this model, but it's an airplane first and then it's a boat. But I know that the transportation stuff is always clustering together. So it is keeping the sort of transportation category and just adding people to it. But it's becoming more and more out of distribution in a way relative to normal brain data of someone seeing people.
It's also quite hard to just add a person to a picture of a plane,
Yeah.
The person like riding on the plane.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
But no, I think that explanation makes sense. Like in the intermediate values, you will see a more sort of flexible composition or subtraction, but the extreme ones are out of distribution. Cool.
I hope that answers your question. Okay, great. Yeah, actually with that, I think I'll be moving to the end summary already. And then perhaps if there's more questions, we can discuss them. Yeah, so with all these results, we think that CorText offers a new framework for flexible neural decoding in this generative manner. And I think we still have to, or we are also still discovering what we can do with this. And I think, for example, the different kind of output formats and thinking about this In-Silico microstimulation, really diving a bit deeper into this, are very exciting new ways that we have opened up, I think, with making this kind of interface. Yeah, so we showed that the brain data can be end-to-end embedded into a space that's operable for a pre-trained LLM, and it can somewhat generalize to unseen concepts and allow for these In-Silico experiments. And that again shows that, I think what I said in the beginning, the structure of natural language is not just convenient for us. It's a really powerful scaffold for uncovering structure in neural data. And yeah, to me, that is really fascinating. And I think we have not seen the end of, its possibilities, I think. Yeah. Oh yeah, maybe something to say about practical deployability of this model. Sorry, I forgot to add that to my slide, but it might be interesting. It's quite easy to train this mapping. It's end-to-end, and you have this parameter count. You can, it depends a bit on how many vertices you want to use. We're using everything, but you can do some kind of signal-to-noise ratio sampling. You don't have to do full fine-tuning, and this just takes a few hours, maybe on an H100. So if you have good data and good annotations, it is quite feasible to train a thing like this. And so then in the future, we would really love to close the loop with the microstimulation using some gradient-based attribution analyses, further characterize the brain language mapping with ablation and interpretability analyses, and further testing and stress testing the modularity of the architecture. Then I think, as we all know, LLMs are much more powerful than just doing Q&A. They can do reasoning and in-context learning, and we would like to harness these powers as well. And then, of course, the generalization to other data sets and modalities is an important thing to show. We have some exciting new results with macaque intracranial recordings coming soon. So we're slowly starting to see that this framework can indeed generalize if you have good quality data. And with that, I would like to thank you and thank all my co-authors. Thanks for bearing with me. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Victoria. That was great. I can start us with a question while other people are thinking of questions. Well, one thing easily is, have you tried making a demo? It would be cool to have a demo where we chat with a model with random NSD images.
Yeah, no, so yeah, we're working on a code base and we'll have a demo online. We're still figuring out how to make that practical because we don't want everyone to have to download the whole data or have to host it in some way. So we're still figuring out how to do it practically. We're still under review, so we're working on this, and we'll, when it's out, get it all online for everyone to use. But I can say from my experience, I think I was kind of late with actually making the, having a command line interface to actually chat with it. I was always just running inference, whatever, get a table of prediction, looking at it. But it's so weird to chat with your model, to chat with the brain. It was the funniest experience. So I really hope to be sharing that experience with you soon.
Yeah, I think it'd be really cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels here with, I think, the more image decoding stuff that we've been involved in. So I have a couple questions, but first of all, I just want to make sure I understand the method right. Like, so it's sort of like Lava, like VLMs, but instead of feeding image embeddings, you're feeding like brain embeddings, essentially, where you're training how to tokenize the brain into that VLM, into the LLM space of Llama.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's no, image embedding whatsoever. It's all just the Llama text embeddings, right?
Yeah. The brain data is the image embedding.
Right. So do you think you're at all limited by the sense that, the training data is the input of the brain activity that corresponds to the scene image, and then you have the captions of the images, but then what about content that's maybe not present in a caption, right? So I was thinking, like, is there benefit to doing multimodal stuff, like having a pre-trained image embedding and a pre-trained language embedding, and then you're fine-tuning or training how to do the brain tokens specifically?
So I think my main worry, and that's also why I'm not using CLIP or other kinds of vision language models, is data leakage, because most of these models have seen COCO. And I would be worried that the model would latch on to those image embeddings rather than the brain embeddings. So for me, that is why we want to sort of keep it clean from images, basically, or from models that might have seen the underlying data annotations, either be it images or captions.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I feel like there could be ways around that. You can drop out the image embedding selectively during inference. Obviously, it would be only brain input. I'm just thinking, like, there is necessarily signal loss from going from images to text, right? Like, you can describe in a couple sentences an image, but you'll never fully grasp the texture, color, minor differences, minor things about an image that people think are not relevant to describe in a caption. And that could potentially be relevant to increasing the signal.
But that's also why we are using the Elvis Q&A datasets, which has this more fine-grained questions. And still, so you will get more questions about the numerosity or position or color, which are definitely not mentioned in captions often. So this already makes it a lot richer, but you're very right in that, whether it's something is all the way on the left, more close to another object, or more closer to the left of some object, you will not get that from either caption or fine-grained Q&A. And I think it's a big question. What is the right level of granularity of the data annotations that we want?
I see. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No. But
Instruct dataset, I imagine, helps quite a lot. Then it allows the flexibility of chatting.
Yeah, and it's quite a rich data set too. I think it has like 10 Q&A pairs per trial or something. So then together with these captions, we also see, I think it has some kind of regularizing effects. I think also captioning becomes better because you have those Q&A pairs. So the model's just latching on to much more information. Yeah. Yeah, but I think for us it's important to stick definitely to natural language because we want to not just do brain translation. That's not our goal. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. So you want to, in other words, meaningfully understand what the brain is representing, right? And I think that that's something that's come up quite a lot in, the pure image decoding reconstruction stuff, which is like you have the ground truth of what was seen, but the potential of image reconstruction is more than just like trying to get as close as possible to the ground truth. You're trying to actually figure out a representation that's maybe unique to the individual. Yep. Maybe you can like compare how a clinical group is representing the image differently from a control group. And so I can see how having a chat interface allows you to maybe more easily probe the representation that you're getting out of the model. But at the same time, I'm curious what your thoughts are in like meaningful deviation of an embedding versus just like random noise leading to the caption to be wrong or something. Like if always you're not going to be perfect in decoding or embedding or whatever. How do you tell whether the caption being slightly off is that person actually represented the image in that way versus it's just the model being bad?
Yeah, but it's a challenge for image reconstruction too. Maybe someone didn't spot that one detail or paid extra attention, or something is especially meaningful for them, and you won't see that, or it's very hard to differentiate between in CorText 2, of course. Why a model failed to reconstruct or to answer a certain question properly, whether that is something in the neural representation or in the model. This is, I think that's one of the challenges that we face, right? But yeah, I think good control models and showing also maybe different ways of decoding or showing the possible decoding of certain information and having controls together gives you at least somewhat of an estimate of where the faults may lie. But it's hard. We don't know what people have actually experienced when they were laying in the scanner.
Yeah.
Sort of related, but going after a different part of the talk, like I thought the zero-shot generalization experiments were really interesting, where you remove the zebra, the surfer, and the airplane, I think, from the training data. I was almost hoping that would work, that the model would spontaneously like, yeah, that's a zebra. I'm familiar with the concept of zebra, and it's like a striped-looking horse. It's probably a zebra. Were you hoping that it might work?
Yes, I was hoping. But I mean, I've been trying to get this to work for forever, and trying to get it to say zebra,
I know zebra.
Not necessarily the word zebra, but I guess like the ideal output would be a horse with black and white stripes, like something that's super zebra.
It does that. It does that sometimes. Or we'll say,
oh, really?
I talk with it and it says like it's a giraffe, and I say, okay, well, what colors does it have? And we'll say, yeah, black and white stripes. And I'm like, come on. You're almost there. But I do realize now, like, we train it to not say that. So it's just
how is it ever going to get the word zebra if it's not anywhere in the training, right?
No, exactly. And we do see, if we're looking at the token or at the logits and stuff, there is evidence for zebras there. But yeah, the giraffe or the horse or whatever is just gonna win when it has to output the caption. So
I guess actually maybe it is possible to predict zebra, because if you've got the frozen language embedding space that contains zebra in it, and you've got the cluster of horse, and you've got some other cluster that's maybe next to zebra, and you've perfectly got the intermediate of that, you, I guess, could output the token.
Yeah, exactly. But then the way that we train it by excluding the zebras, there's just like a gap in embedding space right there, and so of course it's going to fall to horses or cows or whatever next to it because there's just a gap right there. So but in principle, if we would interpolate brain embedding ourselves, it might be able to do it. I'm not sure.
When you
And
say
of
the
course, there's
gap,
regularization methods to make this space more smooth and perhaps make it a bit easier for the model.
when you say the gap in the embedding space, what do you mean exactly? Do you mean like the PCA step?
No, I mean the brain embeddings. So just in the MLPs, because they never see zebra trial maps to the zebra language space.
Yeah, but say for the surf, for example, it's maybe more clear.
Mm-hmm.
It's seen snowboarding, and so it activates the snowboarding feature a little bit, and it's seen water, so it activates water a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
After those two, they should compose together in the LLM's brain to be like
Yeah.
snowboard on water. That's a surfer.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe this idea of the compositionality, what you're mentioning, I think that's interesting. So I still think, okay, it's still not likely for it to combine those two, so it won't. So it will think, okay, it's more likely that I'm talking as if the model has an I. I shouldn't do that. The model might be uncertain about that composition of things and thus latch on to what it is more confident about that is the closest thing, which might be a skier, right? Or what was it, a horse on the beach or something?
In the image literature, there's the argument of like it's just a fancy classifier. Like this is something that's come up quite a bit, and I think that there's a lot of evidence to support it's not just a fancy classifier. And part of the argument is like if you've essentially you have, and I mean the UMAP dimensionality reduction is the way to plot that it's not just clusters and it's picking the closest cluster. At the same time, though, it's like you eliminate a concept like planes, and if it was just a fancy classifier, what would be the outcome? It would be the closest cluster, which would be kites. And so that by itself is not actually is actually kind of confirming the bad interpretation of like it's just a fancy classifier. But the other way of assessing it is like some of the stuff we did with retrieval, right? It's you can specifically visualize the UMAP, you can retrieve specific examples within a cluster. You can do very fine-grained sort of assessment of like you've got all these different zebras, and you can ask questions in this case, like specifics about that one image, and you can tell that like, okay, this is a zebra eating with like 5 zebras in it. You have numerosity. Like these are the ways to show that it's more than just a classifier, right? Yeah. But yeah, I do think I wish there was more meaningful ways of showing that it's learned this ability to interpolate, because if it is just being like, okay, kites instead of planes, then it doesn't really the alternative is that it just randomly picks a cluster. I don't know if that would be
But of course, I mean, we do show that it can actually output the word if you give it the right space, right? The right thinking space, the right context to start doing that. And I think maybe interesting to note is that, but I'm currently working on that. These clusters are quite peripheral, right? And we're taking out the whole cluster. But Conor, you mentioned compositionality, and what I'm testing right now is we have people in the data set and we have food in the data set, but there's also people eating food. So what if I hold out all of those? Can the model then meaningfully interpolate and combine those two concepts? And we're starting to see signs that it actually can. But we do need, and I think that's what I'm currently working on, is to think a bit more deeply about how these MLPs are learned and what type of regularization or other tricks they need basically to make this space a bit more smooth. But with combining people and foods, it is definitely better than holding out one of these peripheral clusters completely. And so I think that's quite promising.
Yeah, we have a comment from Benjamin. Do you think you could just fine tune the brain embeddings into a native VLM? I mean, this is basically what we were chatting about earlier, but do you think that would be beneficial or problematic?
So to learn a mapping between the brain data and the vision.
Yeah, instead of
the
llama,
shared
you
vision
train
language
it to-
embeddings.
Yeah,
For
instead
example,
of, I guess, mapping the brain embedding to llama, like a text-only LLM, you map it to some multimodal model.
I think it could be useful depending on the purposes that you see, but I think still my one worry is that these models have all seen Coco, and yeah, I think for my purposes, I think that is a bit just risky in terms of data leakage, and that's why I haven't been working with vision language models yet.
Hasn't llama seen Coco as well?
No, not as far as I know. No.
Llama's text only.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it could still have seen the human Coco captions, but as far as I know, it's just trained on these massive file data sets of human text, longer text.
I was curious about some of your inference settings. So language models are non-deterministic, changing the batch size can change the outputs, all that other fun stuff. So I was curious how many rollouts you do per image, and if you see any noticeable variation, or are they all pretty similar?
You mean beams? Or what do you mean rollouts?
So rollout would be, for example, the generating of the captions, right? So if you do like 1, 10, like how many outputs are you sampling, and how consistent are they?
Yeah, so we are doing with a fixed seed, so we don't see much variation between them. No, there's not much variation between. We do it 2 beams and just regular temperature of 1, and otherwise no massive fancy tricks in sampling the space.
Oh no, I wasn't asking about sampling space. Okay, so 2 beams, only 2 rollouts, then 2 generations per input.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then of course for all the different questions that we have for that one input. Yeah. And then we have the 4 different models. Yeah.
So I guess I would be curious if you say turned off beam searching and then did the same question and generated it, I don't know, 10, 50 times, what's the distribution of results? Like how often does it change?
Yeah. It might be interesting to quantify that a little further. Overall, I haven't seen very strong, meaningful differences, but this is, more experience. It would be good to quantify that. Yeah. Do you expect, or would you think that there would be then interesting variations there, but for, maybe the things that the model is more uncertain about, that you will see it flipping around more, or?
Yeah, I mean, the only way to figure that out would be to do it. So you're wondering if the model would interpolate between a zebra or something, and if you only generate 2 times, you may never see the long tail of it guessing 5% of the time zebra, for example.
Yeah,
you would need 100 rollouts for that to even see a long tail like that.
Wow.
And then also beam searching would inhibit exploration of the sampling space.
Yeah, that's a nice idea. Thank
you. I'll read out Rishab's comment. I wonder if you could say more about the novel scientific applications that you think this could make possible, either as your model is today or in the future. Seems like querying the chatbot would be really cool as a demo. Would be exciting to use it, but maybe it's hard to get new insights from a chat interface.
Yeah, I think it's generally an interesting question for the neural decoding work. It's like, okay, what now? We can do it, and that's a proof of concept. We can show what information is there, and with interpretability methods, perhaps ask where can we find that information. I think that can be useful, especially if we can do it hypothesis-driven and go beyond the functional topography that we already know. So for me, I see there's potential there. I think then, of course, there's the question of brain-computer interfaces. Yeah, with clunky fMRI needing many hours, people being in the scanner, that's maybe not as practical. But I hope that with the development of different methods in this space, we may one day be better at having, for example, EEG or other kind of portable clinical decoding applications. And yeah, this in that way, this may be a drop in the ocean in contributing to that, but just might. Of course, we really have to move beyond fMRI for that, but other people are working on it. Yeah, so I think for me, being able to probe the data with this natural language interface and then hopefully closing this loop of stimulating and seeing where certain information is for this model, that's for me the way forward and what this contributes, at least in my research line. I think.
Yeah. Like maybe as a practical example, I know that the MSD data set was really useful. I think the Canwisher lab put out the food specific ROI paper from sort of exploring how different activations arise for different concepts, and maybe something similar. Just to give an example, like you could put in a semantic concept that we don't really know is functionally specific in the brain, and then you can backtrack and kind of visualize different things. You can play around with the activations and see what captions emerge, and maybe sort of surgically figure out where these different concepts lie.
Yeah, exactly. I think the one method I'm looking at right now, I've just a bit of proof of principle, but not enough to show you today. Is to use integrated gradients, which is a gradient-based attribution methods. So you show brain data, you output some words, and then from that words you can go back basically to brain space and then figure out, okay, which dimensions in the neural data were important to predict that word. And then if you do that over lots of iterations, we can maybe find whatever the zebra region is supposed to be. So I hope to close this loop, and indeed, as you say, Paul, to discover some new concepts.
Maybe you could do something with the spatial arrangement. Like the model seems to have pretty good knowledge of the spatial arrangement, and I feel like that's kind of understudied in our understanding of the organization of visual cortex.
Yeah, no, and I don't even know where to start. And I think it's so interesting, especially because, I mentioned all the way in the beginning, like the captions have such a rigid syntax. And, it's always, okay, whatever, a guy on a surfboard or a cow in a field. You can just learn those nouns, put that together, voila. And here we're seeing, no, there's more information that we can latch onto. Of course, we perceive that information. And now, how do we get to that? It's so hard to control also, I think, with natural images data sets that you can't properly control for spatial composition. So there won't be many images of groups of objects flying exactly in that kind of constellation. It might be possible to look into numerosity, or like, is it one person or multiple or groups? But I suspect it's going to be very noisy with this type of data. But I'm fingers crossed.
Nice.
Okay, I just had a quick, comic idea, but like you can apply this to the podcast data or other data sets too, right? Like,
sorry, which data?
There's lots of, I think it's like the Uri Hassan lab, and people from there have put out like podcast recordings of people getting fMRI activity. That's inherently text-based too.
Yeah.
And like you could do this for all sorts of brain paired with text data sets, right?
Yeah, it's true, but there is one fundamental difference here, and that is that we are not aiming to do exact brain translation. So we don't want to just, or we think the model capable of doing more than direct translation of what was this person hearing. So would you then also include different annotations for that content? How to do that? I think that's still a bit of a question. So we want to sort of get to the content of the data from different sides, sort of, so that we can then have different tasks over this content. But yeah, there's many interesting data sets. There's also this new data sets from Martin Hebaert's lab released last week, Lion,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
like NSD plus things and a bunch of Lion images, and it looks wonderful. Then we have this macaque intracranial recordings. But yeah, these are still all defined over visual content. Yeah, I have to think a little bit how to work with other modalities, how to get rich annotations beyond just the sort of literal, the literal content. If you get what I mean.
There's also movie and TV shows like the entire Friends series from
Yeah.
Senior Pod. But obviously, it has transcripts.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different sort of problem because it's kind of unstructured. Paired or transcript is not the same as a caption. But
Yeah, no, but it's cool because you will have the visual content and then the conversations or whatever people are talking about, and it will be extra information over and beyond what you are seeing. So actually, it's kind of cool to work with those kind of multimodal data sets. It's interesting.
we're pretty lucky to have so many nice open data sets with rich,
Yeah.
good data, rich stimuli.
Yep, for sure.
Cool. Well, I think this has been great. Thank you so much for presenting your work. It was super interesting. I think we got some good ideas and good discussion. Hopefully we'll stay in touch.